coming to Attala County, Mississippi as a northern white was culture shock. I had never been in the Deep South before. I was scared because I knew that we were all risking our lives, not just the outside civil rights workers, but most especially the local people in the black community who stepped forward. I knew that Luther Mallet and Wiley Mallet as children had gone with their father to cut down a relative who had been lynched in the forest. And that was an experience that stayed with them their entire lives and motivated their involvement in the civil rights movement. So I was always afraid. I also was in a completely different world. I had seen the civil rights movement in the Deep South on television. I knew that there were risks. I knew that people had been killed. I had seen extreme poverty, even in New York City, particularly in the Bronx, where the black community lived in buildings that looked like they were bombed out shells from World War II. None of that prepared me for the poverty that I saw in Mississippi. I saw families living without running water or electricity in very thin shacks, surviving on surplus government food, trying really hard to make a living and make a go of it, but at every turn finding themselves underpaid or pushed out of work by white employers. I also, on the other hand, experienced a tremendous warm welcome from the black community. That surprised me. When we first arrived as a group in February, I remember some of the younger elementary school children running through the community saying, "The Freedom Riders are here, the Freedom Riders are here." We weren't Freedom Riders, but that was the name that was used for civil rights workers throughout Mississippi. The very first night we were there, we were treated to a huge feast of fried chicken and cornbread and collard greens and sweet iced tea and pecan pie for dessert. And honestly, at first I thought this was a typical dinner in the black community. It wasn't until I had lived in the black community for a while that I understood that that was a feast that had been food prepared and collected by many members of the community to welcome us. That a typical meal was more likely to be cornbread and collard greens and perhaps a little bit of salty meat. So we were given places to stay. We were given food to eat that I'd never tasted before, but that was simply wonderful, particularly when I had the Mallet's barbecue. Quite fantastic, and food I'd never had before. So I felt welcomed, I felt nurtured, and once Luther and I were paired up together and were armed on a daily basis, I felt like there was someone who I was risking my life for, but also someone who was ready to risk his life to protect me. So the welcome was total at that